Hello, everyone. So today we are going to continue our reading of Animal Farm by George Orwell. And just before we start with chapter 3, I think we are going to, as previously, to have a little bit of discussion of the previous chapter. So I, just as before, completed gathering some notes of the previous chapter. And today those notes are rather short and compact. And they are regarding how animals actually formulated the animalism, right? So my main point that I had made during the previous live stream about the chapter 2 was not of what animals did when they were sort of educating themselves for the upcoming rebellion, or how they had this rebellion done, or what had happened after the rebellion. But my main points were with the Seven Commandments. So the major's idea, the major is the old and wise boar that came up with the ideology, was summed up in seven commandments of animalism, right? And animalism is an ideology that all those local animals believed in, right? And commandments were not the full summarization from major speech. Some of those commandments were arbitrarily skipped. So if you were to list everything that he said, even if you would shorten it up to just listing what he said to do and what not to do, that would be a lot more than just seven. So it's some arbitrary chosen uh, points from his speech, right? And they covered identifying enemies, identifying friends, some arbitrary prohibitions, then, of course, prohibition on killing other animals, and only then the declaration of animals equality among animals, right? And my main objection to that was that the order is rather wrong, right? So the most important stuff, and which one is I would not, uh, I wouldn't point out the single most important, yes, but it's obvious that do not kill others and everyone is equal to each other, right? Those are the main, more humane points from the commandments, right? From the major's ideas, and they were put on the last in the last place, right? And the, they are even after some those arbitrary prohibitions. For example, do not drink alcohol, do not wear clothes, or maybe I am wrong. Exactly. Yeah, do not wear clothes, do not sleep in bed, do not drink alcohol. Okay. And this is kind of weird. And I guess that those commandments who are last, if you were to take it as how it would happen in the real world, probably those who are listed before everything else were the last to change, and those who are last, they would be first to change if anything come to changing anything. And we know that the animals claim that these commandments of animalism are unalterable, but I get a feeling that they will be altered in some way. Uh, and probably I'm not really sure about that because I don't have any much I don't have much of experience with ideological documents, uh, but I got a feeling that identification of enemies as the first thing is kind of characterizes ideological documents, right? So you have to know who is the enemy, so that we could just all who are not the enemy could gather together, work together, and do not question some differences in between, right? Just focus all the hatred on enemies. So yeah, those are main points that I took out from the second chapter. Of course, we could talk about uh, how animals were not necessarily objecting to animalism, but rather they didn't really understand it, didn't really share values of animalism, and kind of they kind of just took it on a word, right? Took it on the face. Uh, some animals just wanted to have all the treats that they had before. Uh, the, they didn't have much of it, but whatever they had, they would like to keep it. Uh, there was some a little bit of cliffhanger as to where the milk uh, went, right? Who took the milk? It's not like the milk have the legs of its own and can just walk away. So, and of course, the thing is that they actually had to get back to work, right? But I guess I don't see much of contradictions with what they said before, because nobody said that they wouldn't have to work, but rather that they would be able to split equally all the products that they labored for. And we already see that it doesn't apply in 100% of cases, right? With the milk, for example. So with all that out of our way, we can simply go to chapter 3 for now. Okay, how they toiled and sweated to get in the hay in. But their efforts were rewarded, for the harvest was an even bigger success than they had hoped. Sometimes the work was hard. The implements had been designed for human beings and not for animals, and it was a great drawback that no animal was able to use any tool that involved standing on his hind legs. But the pigs were so clever that they could think of a way around every difficulty. As for the horses, they knew every inch of the field, and in fact understood the business of mowing and racking far better than Jones and his men had ever done. The pigs did not actually work, but directed and supervised the others. With their superior knowledge, it was natural that they should assume the leadership. Boxer and Clover would harness themselves to the cutter or the horse rake. No bits or reins were needed in these days, of course, and trap steadily round and round the field, with the pig walking behind and calling out, "Gee up, comrade," and "Whoa, back, comrade," as the case might be. And every animal down to the humblest worked at turning the hay and gathering it. Even the ducks and hens toiled to and fro all day in the sun, carrying tiny wisps of hay in their beaks. In the end, they finished the harvest in 2 days, less time than it had usually taken Jones and his men. Moreover, it was the biggest harvest that the farm had ever seen. There was no wastage whatever. The hens and ducks, with their sharp eyes, had gathered up the very last stalk, and not an animal on the farm had stolen so much as a mouthful. All through the summer, the work of the farm went like clockwork. The animals were happy as they had never conceived it possible to be. Every mouthful of food was an acute positive pleasure, now that it was truly their own food, produced by themselves and for themselves, not doled out to them by a grudging master. With the worthless parasitical human beings gone, there was more for everyone to eat. There was more leisure too, and experienced as those animals were. They met with many difficulties. For instance, later in the year, when they harvested the corn, they had to thread it out in ancient style and blow away the chaff with their breaths. since the farm possessed no threshing machine. But the pigs, with their cleverness, and Boxers, with his tremendous muscles, always pulled them through. Boxer was the admiration of everybody. He had been a hard worker even in John's times, but now he seemed more like three horses than one. There were days when the entire work of the farm seemed to rest on his mighty shoulders. From morning to night he was pushing and pulling, always at the spot where the was hardest. He had made an arrangement with one of the cockerels to call him in the morning half an hour earlier than anyone else, and would put in some volunteer labor at whatever seemed to be the most needed, before the regular day's work began. His answers to every problem, every setback was, "I will work harder," which he had adopted as his personal motto. Great stuff. I'm gonna look up the word real quick. Ah, Google, don't do this to me. Young domestic cock. Okay, cockerel. I actually kind of surprised that this happy stuff is going on for so long. So I assume for the whole summer, and that they were actually uh, organized themselves quite good, right? There were always people who are way more productive, and they become even more productive when they actually feel like their efforts are not going to be wasted, or at least not everything that they will do will be taken away from them, so they can actually feel the return, and that return is sort of progressive. It increases with the amount of efforts they increase. And I think in Russian Revolution there always were such people who were so motivated by the idea that this time they don't work for some arbitrary master, but rather for more or less for the good of everybody. At least this is what they were told. And I think this is an analogy to that. We'll see how it will come out later. I have some suspicion that the first troubles are going to be when the first cold will start, right? So when the winter or late autumn uh, will set in. But everyone worked according to his capacity. The hens and ducks, for instance, saved 5 bushels of corn at the harvest by gathering up the stray grains. Nobody stole, nobody grumbled over his rations. The quarreling and biting and jealousy, which had been normal features of life in the old days, had almost disappeared. Nobody shirked, or almost nobody. Molly, it was true, was not good at getting up in the mornings, and had a way of leaving work early on the ground that was a stone in her hoof. And the behavior of the cat was somewhat peculiar. It was soon noticed that there was work to be done. The cat could never be found. She would vanish for hours on end and then reappear at meal times or in the evening after work was over, as though nothing had happened. But she always made such excellent excuses and purred so affectionately that it was impossible not to believe in her good intentions. Old Benjamin the donkey seemed quite unchanged since the rebellion. He did his work in the same slow, obstinate way as he had done it in John's times, never shirking and never volunteering for extra work either. About the rebellion and its results, he would express no opinion. When asked whether he was not happier now that Jones was gone, he would say only, "Donkeys live a long time. None of you has ever seen a dead donkey." And the others had to be content with this cryptic answer. hmm So the donkey seems to be the survival kind, right? So I think he feels like the society in which he lives in now is more or less politically charged with something, and he doesn't really know what to do with this except for keeping his opinions to himself in order to outlive them all, so to speak, and at least not to draw any unwanted attention to him. It's interesting character. I already like like him. Uh, and just as cat, right? This is there are always workers like like the cat, which were very good with their mouths and excuses, but not so much with efforts and actually doing something. But let's see what will happen. Will there happen anything? On Sundays, there was no work. Breakfast was an hour later than usual, and after breakfast, there was a ceremony which was observed every week without fail. First came the hoistings of the flag. Snowball had found in the harness room an old green tablecloth of Mrs. Jones, and had painted on it a hoof and a horn in white. This was run up with the flagstaff in the farmhouse garden every Sunday morning. The flag was green, Snowball explained, to represent the green fields of England, while the hoof and horn signified the future republic of the animals which would arise when the human race had been finally overthrown. After the hoisting of the flag, all the animals trooped into the big barn for a general assembly, which was known as the meeting. Here, the work of the coming week was planned out and resolutions were put forward and debated. It was always the pigs who put forward the resolutions. The other animals understood how to vote, but could never think of any resolutions of their own. Snowball and Napoleon were by far the most active in the debates, but it was noticed that these two were never in agreement. Whatever suggestion either of them made, the other could be counted on to oppose it. Even when it was resolved, a cynic no one could object to in itself, to set aside the small padlock behind the orchid as a home of rest for animals who were past work, there was a stormy debate over the correct retiring age for each class of animal. The meeting always ended with the singing of the beasts of England, and the afternoon was given up to recreation. The pigs had set aside the harness room as a headquarters for themselves. Here, in the evenings, they studied blacksmithing, carpenting, and other necessary arts from books which they had brought out of the farmhouse. Snowball also busied himself with organizing the other animals who into what he called animal committees. He was indefatigable at this. He formed the egg production committee for the hens, the clean tails league for the cows, the wild comrades re-education committee. The object of this was to tame the rats and rabbits, the winter wool movement for the sheep, and various others, besides instituting classes in reading and writing. On the whole, these projects were a failure. The attempts to tame the wild creatures, for instance, broke down almost immediately. They continued to behave very much as before, and when treated with generosity, simply took advantage of it. The cat joined the re-education committee and was very active in it for some days. She was seen one day sitting on a roof and talking to some sparrows who were just out of her reach. She was telling them all animals were now comrades, and that any sparrow who chose could come and perch on her paws. But the sparrows kept their distance. Interesting. Yeah, so pigs, it looks like they took the ruling of the society as they were the smartest of the animals. They established lots of committees, and I can see the connections. Uh, I cannot actually argue any logical failure so far, except for yes, it's in the nature of living beings sometimes to take advantage without giving something in return, right? So they took advantage of committees without actually sort of changing the way the committee intended them to do, right? And the cat is a really interesting character. She actually tries to I wonder what would happen if she would broke the rule, right? The sixth commandment, which goes that no animal shall kill any other animal. The reading and writing classes, however, were a great success. By the autumn, almost every animal on the farm was literate in some degree. Good. As for the pigs, they could already read and write perfectly. The dogs learned to read fairly well, but were not interested in reading anything except the Seven Commandments. Muriel, the goat, could read somewhat better than the dogs and sometimes used to read to the others in the evenings from scraps of newspaper which she found on the rubbish heap. Benjamin could read as well as any pig, but never exercised his faculty. So far as he knew, he said there was nothing worth reading. Benjamin is the donkey, right? Yep. hmm Cynical as ever. Clover learned the whole alphabet but could not put words together. Boxer could not get beyond the letter D. He would trace out A, B, C, D in the dust with his great hoof, and then would stand staring at the letters with his ears back, sometimes shaking his forelock, trying with all his might to remember what came next and never succeeding. On several occasions, indeed, he did learn E, F, G, H, but by the time he knew them, he was already discovered that he had forgotten A, B, C, and D. Finally, he decided to be content with the first four letters and used to write them out once or twice every day to refresh his memory. Molly refused to learn any but the six letters which spelled her own name. It's actually five letters. She would form those very neatly out of the pieces of twig and would then decorate them with a flower or two and walk round them admiring them. None of the other animals on the farm could get further than the letter A. So they mean like they cannot write, but they can read. Okay, I guess. Or am I just going too far with my assumption? It was also found that the stupider animals, such as the sheep, hens, and ducks, were unable to learn the Seven Commandments by heart. After much thought, Snowball declared that the Seven Commandments could in fact be reduced to a single maximum, namely four legs good, two legs bad. That's kind of okay. Okay. This, he said, contains the essential principle of animalism. Whoever has thoroughly grasped it would be safe from human influences. The birds at first objected. It seemed to them that they also had two legs, granted, but Snowball proved them that this was not so. A bird's wing, comrades, he said, is an organ of propulsion and not of manipulation. Each should therefore be regarded as a leg. The distinguishing mark of a man is the hand, the instrument with which he does all his mischief. I wonder if that will backfire because the vagueness of the formulation is kind of impressive. I guess at some point when maybe Snowball will not be around anymore uh, to 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 argue the same thing that he just said, someone might consider birds to be enemies, and we'll see what's going to happen. But I guess those plot twists are going to happen eventually, but later on. The birds did not understand Snowball's long words. Propulsion. That's an impressive word for a pig. But they accepted his explanation, and all the humbler animals set to work to learn the new maxim by heart. Four legs good, two legs bad was inscribed on the end wall of the barn, above the Seven Commandments and in bigger letters. When they had once got it by the heart, the sheep developed a great liking for this maxim, and often as they lay in the field, they would all start bleating, four legs good, two legs bad, four legs good, two legs bad, and keep it up for hours on end, never growing tired of it. Napoleon took no interest in snowball committees. He said that the education of the young was more important than anything that could be done for those who were already grown up. It happened that Jessie and Bluebell had both whelped soon after the hay harvest, giving birth between them to 9 sturdy puppies. As soon as they were weaned, Napoleon took them away from their mothers, saying that he would make himself responsible for their education. He took them up into a loft, which could only be reached by a ladder from the harness room, and there kept them in such seclusion that the rest of the farm soon forgot their existence. I don't like that. I feel foul play here. Whelped. What does whelped mean? If this means what I think it means. Uh-huh. Okay, so those are puppies. Okay, okay. Yeah, I just forgot the names and I wasn't sure. Of course, 9 sturdy puppies. I know that I don't want to think about that, but I know that pigs might eat smaller animals. So I really hope that the Napoleon did not eat those puppies. And the fact that everybody forgot that those puppies exist kind of worrisome. And actually, this is one of the things that I forgot initially. But yeah, the animals would need to multiply, and animals multiply in a great number. And what would happen to these animals? Because, well, let's face it, the farms are organized in a way that the baby animals would be disposed of in some way, either sold or slaughtered for, for some product. But if no one is doing that, what would happen to the growth of the farm population? I kind of don't really want to think about that because it's a disturbing thought to me at the moment because those animals are so uh, human-like at the moment, so I don't really want to picture them slaughtering their own children. Okay, let's hope that this won't come to this, or the author would gracefully admit this. The mystery of where the milk went to was soon cleared up. It was mixed every day into pig's mash. The early apples were now ripening, and the grass of the orchard was littered with windfalls. The animals had assumed, as a matter of course, that these would be shared out equally. One day, however, the order went forth that all the windfalls were to be collected and brought into the harness room for the use of the pigs. And at this, some of the animals murmured, but it was no use. All the pigs were in full agreement on this point, even Snowball and Napoleon. Squealer was sent to make the necessary explanation to the others. Comrades, he cried, you do not imagine, I hope, that we pigs are doing this in spirit of selfishness and privilege? Many of us actually dislike milk and apples. I dislike them myself. Our sole objects in taking these things is to preserve our health. Milk and apples, this has been proved by science, comrades, contain substances absolutely necessary to the well-being of a pig. We pigs are brain workers. The whole management and organization of this farm depend on us. Day and night we are watching over your welfare. It is for your sake that we drink that milk and eat those apples. Do you know what would happen if we pigs failed in our duty? Jones would come back. Yes, Jones would come back. Surely, comrades, cried Squealer almost pleadingly, skipping from side to side and whisking his tail. Surely there is no one among you who wants to see Jones come back? Now, if there was one thing that the animals were completely certain of, it was they did not want Jones back. When it was put to them in this light, they had no more to say. The importance of keeping the pigs in the good health was all too obvious. So it was agreed without further argument that the milk and the windfall apples, and also the main crop of apples when they ripened, should be preserved for the pigs alone. Okay, so this is the end of the third chapter. I want to comment that the last situation is kind of tough because at some point I want to argue that the pigs are just trying to play all other animals as fools and just to take advantage of their naivety. I would say that is the most appropriate word at the moment. Uh, but on the other hand, those pigs actually did kind of orchestrated the work of the farm. And so, is this true that pigs need those products? Because, well, brain work actually requires some additional things, I think, right? We all know that, for example, if you do not kind of not in the shape in terms of your thinking today, you may eat something, uh, something with sugar, and it would increase your brain's performance, right? Is this the case? And what other animals could do to prove it, right? So there is a certain, might be a certain collusion between all the peaks. What to do with this? I have absolutely no idea, because all other animals, judging by how their education went, they actually did had some troubles with studying, thinking, logic maybe. I think that the donkey might see the things as they are, or more or less, right? But he wouldn't interfere with pigs' decision, because pigs are obviously in charge, and who knows what they would do to the donkey, to Benjamin, to old Benjamin. He obviously certain to make sure that he set up in a direction to outlive all those troubles and changes and whatever is going to happen. But yeah, at some point, if it will be proven that pigs are absolute evil, somebody have to keep them in check, right? So they would have to check on what they are doing, what's happening behind the doors, what's with their logic. How to do that if those pigs are actually more smart than, if they're smarter than everybody else, right? Pigs actually have to be afraid that somebody will figure out what they're doing, and who's gonna do that? Unless there is some sort of troubles between those pigs, there is no point for any of them to bring each other to the spot and to open their wrongdoings. This is a tough situation. I see that there is a, this is the beginning of great trouble of how pigs will take advantage of the farm and of the trust that the other animals gave them. We'll see how's that going, how that will go. The vague formulation of the commandment, arbitrarity of this probably is going to. I'm not sure if this is considered to be like a constitution for them. That is just declaration of some facts, but not exactly the set of rules by which they are going to uh, live day to day, right? Just some general like explanations of what they're all about, but not a particular instruction how to live. or are those some sort of laws? I think I just well, any lawyer who might listen to me would just cringe right now, right? Because I just probably I said that well, my understanding of the law is not I'm not the brightest lawyer in the world because I'm not a lawyer at all. So don't listen to that. But what I'm saying is that are those commandments considered to be a law or just some kind of principles? Because the more those commandments are vaguely formulated, the more power those who will wield them will actually have, because they would have an advantage of being able uh, to what to um, what is the word? But of course, to interpret to interpret the those rules in the way that would fit them to benefit them the most, and nothing good will happen out of that. Okay, so I don't want to end this stream so early. So I guess we are going to go through another chapter because this is a great cliffhanger right now, and I'm actually very interested with what will happen next. So, chapter 4. By the late summer, the news of what had happened on the animal farm had spread across half the country. Every day, Snowball and Napoleon sent out flights of pigeons, those whose instructions were to mingle with all the animals on neighboring farms, tell them the story of the rebellion, and teach them the tune of Beasts of England. Most of this time, Mr. Jones had spent sitting in the tap room of the Red Lion at Wellington, complaining to anyone who would listen of the monstrous injustice he had suffered in being turned out of his property by a pack of good-for-nothing animals. The other farmers sympathized in principle, but they did not, as at first, give him much help. At heart, each of them was secretly wondering whether he could not somehow turn John's misfortune into his own advantage. It was lucky that the owners of the two farms, which adjoined Animal Farm, were on permanently bad terms. One of them, which was named Foxwood, was a large, neglected, old-fashioned farm, much overgrown by woodland, with all its pastures worn out and its hedges in a disgraceful condition. Its owner, Mr. Pilkington, was an easy-going gentleman farmer who spent most of his time in his fishing or hunting according to the season. Another farm, which was called Pinchfield, was smaller and better kept. Its owner was a Mr. Frederick, a tough, shrewd man perpetually involved in lawsuits and with a name for driving hard bargains. These two disliked each other so much that it was difficult for them to come to any agreement, even in defense of their own interests. Nevertheless, they were both thoroughly frightened by the rebellion on Animal Farm, and very anxious to prevent their own animals from learning too much about it. Well, I actually didn't think that this would go this far with uh, being a beast fable in a way that animals actually have this consider it to have the same intellect as people. So I thought that the animals, they kind of can talk to each other, but they cannot communicate with people. So like in real world. So but here it's as if, well, who would take actually who would take the rebellion from animals? No one would. People would hunt them down if their livelihood would depend on that. So I actually have to suspend my disbelief even further, right? So, uh, and I'm not saying that this is the best thing about this novel. It's rather that I got the rules a bit better now. At first, they pretended to laugh to scorn the idea of animals managing a farm for themselves. The whole thing would be over in a fortnight, they said. They put it about that the animals on the manor farm, they insisted on calling it the manor farm, they would not tolerate the name animal farm, were perpetually fighting among themselves and were also rapidly starving to death. When time passed, and the animals had evidently not starved to death, Frederick and Pilkington changed their tune and began to talk of the terrible wickedness that now flourished on Animal Farm. It was given out that the animals there practiced cannibalism, tortured one another with red hot horseshoes, and had their females in common. This was what came of rebellion against the laws of nature, Frederick and Pilkington said. Wow, that is a lot of things. So it's as if the author actually sympathizes with the earlier revolution. Is it? Because because yeah, so the having females in common, this is kind of stone in the garden of Communist Manifesto when they sort of were either claimed to have or somebody claimed that they would have a community of women, and meaning that there would be no family per se. And I actually am, even though I read through Communist Manifesto, it was this part of it was written in such a cryptic language that I did not really understand what was the point of it in the manifesto itself. There is a lot of things that are being told about Soviet Union, and there are some wicked tales about starving to death, about and well, that actually had happened. The famine actually happened in Soviet Union, but it's not like the whole Union died of it, right? But people really suffered from it. Uh, but cannibalism, torture, there are a lot of things, a lot of documents that are saying that this also took place there, and I it's not like an obvious fact, right? So some reports, are they true? Who knows? I assumed that people from from the West, especially George Orwell as the critic of totalitarian states, would consider them to be true. But now it looks like he takes the position that some of such rumors of this terrible wickedness, he considered it a great exaggeration, which I'm surprised, and I'm glad that there are things that can surprise me in terms of his position, because I thought at some point that this would be like a straight critique of the communistic society, right, or socialist society. But it actually kind of takes the more or less middle point, objective side, probably. Who knows? But at least it's not like it's being told with only one thought in the mind that com is bad and the previous mode of existence is good, right? So great, good for him, good for him. However, these stories were never fully believed. Rumors of a wonderful farm where the human beings had been turned out and the animals managed their own affairs continued to circulate in vague and distorted forms. And throughout that year, a wave of rebelliousness ran through the countryside. So exactly who did those farmers, Frederick and Pilkington, were talking to about this terrible wickedness? Did they talk about it to their animals? This is some unbelievable stuff. I had to Suspend my disbelief even further. Okay. Bulls, which had always been tractable, suddenly turned savage. Sheep broke down hedges and devoured the clover. Cows picked the pale over. Hunters refused their fences and shot their riders on to the other side. Above all, the tune and even the words of Beasts of England were known everywhere. It had spread with astonishing speed. The human beings could not contain their rage when they heard this song, though they pretend to think it is merely ridiculous. They could not understand, they said, how even animals could bring themselves to sing such contemptible rubbish. Any animal caught singing it was given a flogging on the spot. And yet the song was irrepressible. The blackbirds whistled it in the hedges, the pigeons cooed it in the elms. It got into the din of the smithies and the tune of the church bells. And when the human beings listened to it, they secretly trembled, hearing it in a prophecy of their future doom. Early in October, when the corn was cut and stacked and some of it was already threshed, a flight of pigeons came whirling through the air and alighted in the yard of Animal Farm in the wildest excitement. Jones and all his men, with half a dozen others from Foxfoot and Pitchfield, had entered the five-barred gate and were coming up the cart track that led to the farm. They were all carrying sticks except Jones, who was marching ahead with a gun on his hands. Obviously, they were doing to attempt to recapture of the farm. They were going to attempt the recapture of the farm. This had long had been expected, and all preparations had been made. Snowball, who had studied an old book of Julius Caesar campaigns, which he had found in the farmhouse, was in charge of the defensive operations. He gave his orders quickly, and in a couple of minutes every animal was at his post. As the human beings approached the farm buildings, Snowball launched his first attack. All the pigeons, to the number of 35, flew to and fro over the man's head and muted upon them from mid-air. And while the men were dealing with this, the geese, who had been hiding behind the hedge, rushed out and pecked viciously at the calves of their legs. However, it was only a light skirmish maneuver, intended to create a little disorder, and the men easily drove the geese off with their sticks. Snowball now launched his second line of attack. Muriel, Benjamin, and all of the sheep, with Snowball at the head of them, rushed forward and prodded and butted the men from every side, while Benjamin turned round and lashed at them with his small hoofs. But once again, the men with their sticks and their hobnail boots were too strong for them, and suddenly, at a squeal from Snowball, which was a signal for retreat, all the animals turned and fled through the gateway into the yard. The men gave a shout of triumph. They saw, as they imagined, their enemies in flight, and they rushed after them in disorder. This was just what Snowball had intended. As soon as they were well inside the yard, the three horses, the three cows, and the rest of the pigs, who had been lying in ambush in the cowshed, suddenly emerged in their rear, cutting them off. Snowball now gave the signal for the charge. He himself dashed straight for Jones. Jones saw him coming, raised his gun, and fired. The pellets scored bloody streaks along Snowball's back, and a sheep dropped dead. Without halting for an instant, Snowball flung his 15-stone against Jones' legs. Jones was hurled into a pile of dung and his gun flew out of his hands. But the most terrifying spectacle of all was Boxer, rearing up on his hind legs and striking out with his great iron-shod hoofs like a stallion. His very first blow took a stable lad from Foxwood on the skull and stretched him lifeless in the mud. At the sight, several men dropped their sticks and tried to run. Panic overtook them, and the next moment all the animals together were chasing them round and round the yard. They were gored, kicked, beaten, trampled on. There was not an animal on the farm that did not take vengeance on them after his own fashion. Even the cat suddenly leaped off a rope on a cowman's shoulders and sank her claw in his neck, at which he yelled horribly. At a moment when the opening was clear, the men were glad enough to rush out of the yard and make a bolt for the main road. And so within 5 minutes of their invasion, they were in ignominious retreat, by the same way as they had come, with a flock of geese hissing after them and pecking at their calves all the way. Somebody was has dropped lifeless. Let's see what had happened. Okay, of course. All the men were gone except one. Back in the yard, Boxer was pawing with his foot at the stable lad who lay face down in the mud, trying to turn him over. The boy did not stir. "He is dead," said Boxer sorrowfully. "I had no intention of doing that. I forgot that I was wearing iron shoes. Who will believe that I didn't do this on purpose?" "No sentimentality, comrade," cried Snowball, from whose wounds the blood was still dripping. "War is war. The only good human being is a dead one." "Hm. I have no wish to take life, not even human life," repeated Boxer, and his eyes were full of tears. "Where's Molly?" exclaimed somebody. Molly, in fact, was missing. For a moment there was a great alarm. It was feared that the men might have harmed her in some way, or even carried her off with them. In the end, however, she was found hiding in her stall with her head buried among the hay in the manger. She had taken to flight as soon as the gun went off, and when the others came back from looking for her, it was to find that the stable lad, who in fact was only stunned, had already recovered and made off. Oh man, that's a relief. The animals had now reassembled in the wildest excitement, each recounting his own exploits in the battle at the top of his voice. And a prompt celebration of the victory was held immediately. The flag was run up, and the Beasts of England was sung number of times. Then the sheep who had been killed was given a solemn funeral, a hawthorn bush being planted on her grave. At the graveside, Snowball made a little speech, emphasizing the need for all animals to be ready to die for Animal Farm if need be. The animals decided anonymously to create a military decoration, Animal Hero First Class, which was conferred there and then on Snowball and Boxer. It consists of a brass medal. They were really some of old horse brasses which had been found in the harness room, to be worn on Sundays and holidays. There was also Animal Hero Second Class, which was conferred posthumously on the dead sheep. There was much discussion as to what the battle should be called. In the end, it was named the Battle of the Cowshed, since that was where the ambush had been sprung. Mr. Jones's gun had been found lying in the mud, and it was known that there was a supply of cartridges in the farmhouse. It was decided to set the gun up at the foot of the flagstaff like a piece of artillery, and to fire twice a year, once on October the 12th, the anniversary of Battle of Cowshed, and once on Midsummer Day, the anniversary of the rebellion. I wonder if this is analogy to the Second World War, which was highly regarded, well, which is highly regarded as one of the main holidays right now, the Victory Day in Soviet Union and Russia. Or is it some other war? Because when Russian Revolution took place, there would be a great deal of war first in between with the forces that were to take the previous way of life back. Then some intervention forces that also tried to re-establish the previous government. Also, it all took place during the First World War, but I think this would be a very complicated uh, to introduce in a beast fable. Well, actually, this part did a great job of trying to lay out a historical context. Uh, we'll see what will happen with this. Those actually two chapters did less of laying out the logic, philosophy of the animalism, and of some injustices that I'm certain this would be the main point of the whole book. Some injustices that are going to happen on Animal Farm. At the moment, at least, I'm certain of it, but well, we'll see if time will prove me wrong. And I didn't find anything in the fourth chapter, except for maybe that, well, during the battle. Well, I don't really have anything to say about that. Uh, it actually did good to establish that the boxer, I actually kind of rooted for the boxer. I was afraid that he would drop dead because, well, he is the main force on the farm. He is the main force, uh, period, in peacetime and in war. And I would assume that at some point he, as the main force, would just run to the Mr. Jones and kick him and die in the process. And I I had an idea that this would be a downfall to the farm because he is the most productive one on the farm itself. And if the animals would were to lose the boxer due to some external trouble such as the war, the whole farm would be in much of a trouble. But it didn't happen, which I'm glad that it didn't happen. It even actually almost went without bloodshed. So the poor sheep, but it was it was well, unnamed, yes. So nameless sheep. Even the author didn't respect it very much, obviously. But yeah. Uh, so yeah. So the third chapter were about some of the social things that happened during the first days of the new government on the farm. And the chapter 4 covered the external situation, right? And well, I'm still not sure what this will lead us to, right? I kind of have a general picture, but I'm not going to share it for now. So this was a great pleasure of mine to read through all those two chapters. I, as usual, I'm going to think about it for a while, compose some notes, because obviously those chapters were not pointless, and there are some lessons to learn from them, which I'm going to try to extract. And we will start from that during the next live stream. So I'm gonna see you sometime soon, and for now, bye bye.